This is Democracy Watch. So, Mark, Louisiana Republicans were ordered to draw a new map that includes a second majority black district, but now they're pulling something of a stunt. Can you explain what's happening here?
Yeah, this is not just a stunt. This is a stunt in a horror movie. I mean, the fact is we've talked a lot and there's been a lot of public commentary about what the threats are to democracy and the Voting Rights Act. And what Louisiana Republicans are trying to do is would literally strangle off enforcement of the Voting Rights Act. They have asked the full Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals to reverse its decision and rule that private parties cannot bring litigation under Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. This would be exactly the kind of legal catastrophe that we have been warning people about with respect to other cases that have been much higher profile.
And this is to confirm here. This is what's happening in the Eighth Circuit as well, correct?
It is, and not to say that what happened in the Eighth Circuit is not important. The Eighth Circuit is, obviously a very important circuit, but it does not cover the states. All of the circuits have different state coverage, and the Fifth Circuit, covers Louisiana, it covers Texas, it covers states that are central to enforcement of the Voting Rights Act.
Right, and
The
states
Eighth
right
Circuit.
now that your firm and other groups have sued for to add seats because of Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act.
Absolutely. And when you talk about where are the heartland of states that were formerly covered by Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act, where are the states most often sued under Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act? They are in the Fifth Circuit. So this is a big, big case to watch, and it is a terrible power play that Republicans are trying to pull in Louisiana to evade the Supreme Court order that came down in the Alabama case and then in the Louisiana parallel case, but also to undermine voting rights for a generation around the country.
Mark, in your best estimate, will this attempt to circumvent the court's ruling work in Louisiana?
I sure as hell hope not. And it's one of these things, Brian, where if you had said to 10 legal scholars a year ago, is there a reasonable claim for the idea that there is no private right of action, no ability of private parties to enforce the Voting Rights Act? You would have gotten none of those 10 people would have said this was a serious legal argument. None of them. And yet here we are with Republicans now latching onto another fringe, right-wing, disenfranchising, anti-voting legal theory, presumably with the hope of getting the Fifth Circuit to follow the Eighth Circuit. When the Eighth Circuit did it, this was a tsunami. This was unexpected. This was a legal blockbuster. And now they're trying to get the Fifth Circuit to travel that same route. And as sure as I sit here, the goal is to get this up to that conservative 6-3 majority in the U.S. Supreme Court. But I have news for them. They're in for a fight. I don't think they're going to win in the Fifth Circuit, but they're sure as heck not going to win in the U.S. Supreme Court.
Well, as Louisiana Republicans try to get the Fifth Circuit to do what the Eighth Circuit did in preventing private litigants from bringing Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act cases, the Fifth Circuit already has rulings establishing precedent regarding Section 2. So would it be able to undermine its own precedent?
Yeah, so that's why this is such a blockbuster move by the state of Louisiana. And by blockbuster, I mean in a bad way. When you said a stunt, I said it's a stunt from a horror movie. It's not from one of those like nice Christmas movies that you have where
Right.
you're like, oh, look, they do those cute stunts with the elves. No, this is a bad stunt. And so this is an effort to completely reverse the Fifth Circuit's prior precedent, to ignore those precedents, to reverse those precedents, and latch onto this fringe argument that there is no private enforcement of the Voting Rights Act, which would gut for, in one of the most important places in the country, enforcement of the VRA.
Correct me if I'm wrong here, but could it be even more dangerous? Because let's say the Fifth Circuit does adopt what the Eighth Circuit has and says that private litigants can't sue to enforce the Voting Rights Act. If your firm, for example, decided to appeal it to the Supreme Court, isn't there the possibility that the Supreme Court could agree with the Fifth Circuit and the Eighth Circuit and make that precedent for the entire country where private litigants can't bring Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act cases?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Look, I don't think there's any question that the efforts by the Republican Party through these various states, Republican conservative activists, the Federalist Societies, the Leonard Leos, there's no question they are counting on either them losing and taking one of these cases to the Supreme Court or getting enough circuits in a bad place that the folks who are fighting for voting rights and the Voting Rights Act will have no choice but to go to the U.S. Supreme Court. You know, this is how we wound up. Remember last term, we had Allen v. Milligan, which was their last effort to gut Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. We had the fringe independent state legislature case that went to the U.S. Supreme Court. They are looking for ways to bring these fringe theories to the U.S. Supreme Court. Now, they went 0 for 2 last time, right? They lost that Alabama case. They lost the fringe independent state legislature case. But they're looking for worse and worse, crazier and crazier, fringier and fringier legal theories to bring, because they know they can't win if minority voting rights are protected. They know that if we have a system of democracy, which everyone is involved in, their political positions and their electoral positions are threatened, and that's why they're doing this.
Well, they kind of have pro-democracy organizations between a rock and a hard place because if they win in the Fifth Circuit, for example, and other circuit courts, then they know that if Democrats appeal it, they could be appealing it to the Supreme Court, which could make this precedent for the entire country. And if they don't appeal it, well, then that's it. We kind of just given up on that entire circuit and all of the states that fall under that circuit's umbrella.
Yeah, so I can't speak for every voting rights group. I can't speak for all of the Democratic Party. I can only speak for myself. And here's my message. I never give up and I never shrink away from a fight. If the Republicans think that they're going to win a high-profile fight over voting rights in the U.S. Supreme Court, we will have that fight, and they will lose. They thought they were going to win that high-profile fight over the independent state legislature theory, and they lost. They were confident, they were sure they were going to win that fight in Alabama, and they were humiliated in the U.S. Supreme Court. So, you know, I don't want this fight. Nobody wants this fight going to the U.S. Supreme Court, but if it's going to be a fight, we're going to show up.
Mark, what's your reaction to 13 states signing on to a brief in support of this move?
Yeah, so it's actually worse than that. It's 13 states have signed on to this brief. But if you add the states that signed on to or were involved in the Eighth Circuit case, it's 21 states. 21 Republican attorneys general have taken the position in one or both federal case to gut Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. Think about that. There are only, 25, 26, 27 Republican attorneys general in the entire country. This is the position of the modern Republican Party. The position of the modern Republican Party is that there should be no protections for voting rights. There should be no Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. There should be nothing that prevents the dilution of minority voting in redistricting and in voting cases. It is a dangerous, dangerous time we live in. And everyone listening to this needs to do your part. You need to stand up, find out if you're one of those 21 states. We publish them on Democracy Docket. And if it is, you need to contact your elected representative and say, this is outrageous.
And of course, to see what those states are, we'll put them here, but also to read more about this stuff as we continue to get any information, it'll be on Democracy Docket. So if you're not yet signed up for Democracy Docket, the link is right here on the screen. It's also in the post description of this video. Mark, we also saw that the outgoing state Senate president in Louisiana, and of course he's a Republican, say publicly that the legislature doesn't want to comply with the court order because they don't want to cast a vote that reduces Republicans' representation in Congress. When Republican leaders go ahead and say the quiet part out loud, is there any doubt that GOP opposition to fair maps is solely about serving their own political interests?
Of course it's about serving their own political interests. That's all the Republican Party is. When Donald Trump does what he does, is it about any other interest other than serving his own interests? No.
Right.
When Mike Johnson, who was the most responsible federal elected official, other than Donald Trump for the insurrection on January 6th, when he does what he does, you know, he said the other day on one of the TV shows that his legislative agenda for this Congress is winning more members of Republicans into Congress.
Right.
That's what he's fighting for.
Right.
You know, they only have their own political interest at heart. And so they will disregard court orders like we saw in Alabama. They will seek to gut the Voting Rights Act and overturn precedent like we're seeing in Louisiana. They will try to overthrow free and fair elections like we saw on January 6th. And the apologists of the Republican Party for January 6th are all over the country. They're in the halls of Congress and all over this country. So those of us who are standing up for democracy, those of us who care about the future of this country, need to understand what we're up against. And we can't shrink from that fight. We don't want it, but we can't shrink from it when it comes to us. So yeah, they spoke the quiet part out loud, but it's not the first time they've done it. And we need to understand the threat that is in front of us.
Seems like the perfect place to leave off. So again, for anybody watching, if you want to support Marc and his team, make sure to sign up for Democracy Docket. The link is right here on the screen. It's also in the post description of this video. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
I'm Marc Elias.
This is Democracy Watch.